Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me for another 15-minute Bible study. Today's study is the conclusion of this seminar on dating the crucifixion and death of Jesus. Before we begin, I would like to remind you of an important statement. Truth is proven true by the harmony that comes from the sum of its parts. The Bible indicates that Jesus was resurrected early Sunday morning. Let's go to Mark 16:1. When the Sabbath was over and Sunday night had begun, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. Verse 2, very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, that would be Sunday morning, Sunday light, they were on their way to the tomb. And they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" Look at John's record. Early, on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene left home and went to the tomb and saw the stone that had been removed from the entrance. Now look at Luke's record. Luke 24:1. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. The Bible does not indicate the hour that Jesus was resurrected, but it does indicate the day. Notice these verses. Jesus said in Luke 18:33, that on the third day the Son of Man will rise again. And then Luke 24, verse 46, he told them, "This is what is written, the Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day." Notice the little preposition on, and on the third day. And then look at Acts 10:40. Peter said, "But God raised him from the dead on the third day, and caused him to be seen." It's clear. Jesus was resurrected on, not before and not after, the third day. Well, we see that Jesus died on Friday, rested in the tomb over Sabbath, and then was resurrected on Sunday, which would be the third day. He was alive before daybreak. The reason I'm making a point of this is that inclusive counting was used in Bible times, and this method of counting is used today, but few people stop and consider how it works. Jesus said in Matthew 12:40, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Well, how do we get 3 days and 3 nights, knowing that Jesus died at 3 p.m. on Friday, day 1? We know that he rested in the tomb over Sabbath, and we know that he was resurrected on Sunday, the first day of the week. So how do we get 3 days and 3 nights out of this? We have seen from Scripture, external history, and orbital geometry that Jesus could not spend 3 full days and 3 full nights, 72 hours in the tomb. If Jesus died at 3 p.m. on Friday, as gospel writers indicate, 72 hours later would be 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon. But even then, that would not be 3 full days and 3 full nights. Night does not begin at 3 p.m. According to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus died about the 9th hour, which would be 3 p.m., and Joseph of Arimathea took down his body from the cross and put it in a tomb before sunset, because the seventh-day Sabbath and the observance of the feast of Passover was about to begin. Jesus was dead for less than 40 hours, from 3 o'clock Friday afternoon to early Sunday morning. Now, I know some people are adamant that Jesus was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, but this position fails to consider the use of inclusive counting and worse, it cannot be sustained without putting the Bible in a state of internal conflict. What is internal conflict? When one Bible verse cancels out what another Bible verse says, we're putting the Bible in a state of internal conflict. One Bible verse must not be used to cancel what is said in another Bible verse. Instead, when there is an apparent conflict, we have to dig deeper to discover what is taking place and how language is being used. The solution to the 3 days and 3 nights question disappears when a person understands the use and nature of inclusive counting. Inclusive counting is a way of counting that avoids the use of fractions. It requires everything to be stated in whole units. Therefore, any part of a minute counts as a whole minute. Any part of an hour counts as a whole hour, like the 3rd hour, the 9th hour, the 6th hour of the day. And any part of a day counts as a whole day. Inclusive counting rounds a fraction of time to the next largest whole number. For example, when counting time in hours, a quarter hour or half an hour is counted as a whole hour. Mark says Jesus died at the 9th hour, but given inclusive counting, we would understand that to mean that Jesus died sometime during the 9th hour. When counting time in units of days, any part of a day is counted as one day. Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week. Therefore, all of Sunday, the night and the light, from sundown to sundown, is counted as the 3rd day. Remember, Jesus said he would rise on the 3rd day? Therefore, we have to measure his death in terms of days, not seconds, minutes, or hours. When Jesus quoted Jonah 1:17, which says that Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, Jesus did this to emphasize 2 points about himself that would never be forgotten. First, Jonah's warning to the city of Nineveh was believable because of his amazing story about spending 3 days and nights in the belly of a whale. The whole city repented and was spared from destruction. But unlike Nineveh, Jesus predicted that his death and resurrection on the 3rd day would have no effect on Israel. And this is why Jesus concluded by saying in Matthew 12:41, "The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now one greater than Jonah is here." The second reason Jesus quoted from Jonah chapter 1 is that just as Jonah was delivered out of the belly of the whale to do God's work, Jesus predicted that he would come out of the tomb, out of the earth, to do God's work. Jesus knew the leaders of Israel would do everything possible to keep the news of his resurrection from the people. And it happened. The leaders of Israel spent a lot of money to keep people from knowing the truth. Look at Matthew 28:11. While the women who had gone to the tomb were on their way to tell the disciples that Jesus had risen from the dead, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. And when the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, 'His disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep.'" Verse 14, "If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." Verse 15, "So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed." And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Because inclusive counting does not include fractions, because Jesus died on day 1, rested on day 2, and was resurrected on day 3, it can be said that he was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights by using inclusive counting. Okay, there's another point that we need to examine to prove that Jesus was crucified in AD 30. Do you remember that New Year's Day in AD 27 also fell on a Thursday? We need to eliminate AD 27 as a possible year for Christ's death. Luke indicates that Jesus was baptized in the fall of AD 27. Given the events that took place after his baptism, it is not possible that Jesus died at a Passover that took place before he was baptized. In Luke 3:1 we read, "In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene." The people, in verse 15, were waiting expectantly, and all were wondering in their hearts if John the Baptist might possibly be the Christ. Then in Luke 3:21 we read, "When all the people were being baptized, Jesus was baptized too." Some scholars claim that the 15th year of Tiberius cannot be 27, but it all depends on how you count. From the perspective of the Jews, AD 27 was the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. But the Romans did not date the rule of the Caesars with regnal years, as the Jews did. Rather, the official count of years in Roman service was determined by the years Tiberius held tribunican power. The Romans would have said AD 27 was the 33rd or 34th year of Tiberius's tribunican power. You see, the 7th year is called Tishri, and on the 15th day of this month, the Feast of Tabernacles was observed. On the 10th day of this month, the Day of Atonement, and on the 1st day of this month, the Feast of Trumpets. So 2 feasts in God's year fall about the middle or time of the full moon on the 15th of Nisan, Passover, the 15th of Tishri, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. But remember, this is God's year, and what I'm describing to you is a year which the Jews have adopted that begins a civil year, which begins with Tishri 1 and goes forward through the year, through the months, coming back around to Tishri. So the Jews used 2 different calendars. I just wanted to show you that so that as we talk about the 15th year of Tiberius, his 15th year began on Tishri 1, the 7th month in God's calendar. History says Augustus Caesar died on August 19 in AD 14. Tiberius stalled the Senate for a few weeks to consolidate his power, and he did not allow the Senate to name him emperor for about a month. On September 17, AD 14, Tiberius became the emperor of Rome at age 56. Because this is a historical fact, we can easily determine how Luke counted the reign of Tiberius. Luke counted the Ascension year of Tiberius as year 1, even though the Ascension year was just a few days in length. This method of counting is found numerous times in the Old Testament. It is a Jewish tradition. Josephus followed this practice when he dated the reigns of the Herods. You can see that in his book Antiquities. And the Mishnah, the Jewish collection of writings, further confirms this method of Jewish regnal reckoning. During the time of Christ, we know the Jews used the Babylonian method to determine the beginning of a new month. Okay, we've already discussed that. But you also need to know that the Jews used a fall-to-fall civil calendar, which they had adopted during the reign of Persian kings. And in fact, Orthodox Jews still use this fall-to-fall calendar at the present time. And the first month of the fall-to-fall calendar is the 7th month of the religious year. So Tishri is the first month in the fall-to-fall calendar, and Nisan, or Abib, is the first month of the religious year. In Bible times, the Jews used 2 calendars, a religious calendar and a civil calendar, and many of them still do. We also do something quite similar. We have a January to January calendar, and we have a school calendar which operates from fall to spring. The school year starts in the fall, ends in the spring. The first month of the Jewish civil calendar, as I said earlier, is called Tishrei. Therefore, when Tiberius ascended to the throne on September 17, AD 14, he ruled about 2 months before a new civil year began in November. Because there are no fractions when using inclusive counting, Luke counted from September 17 to November 11 as year 1, because Tiberius ascended to the throne that year. And the count of years looks like this. So we see year 1, September 17 to November 11. Year 1's only 2 months long, but it's counted inclusively because there are no fractions as a whole year. And his second year began with Tishrei 1 in AD 14 to Tishrei 1 of AD 15, etc. So we see that year 15 becomes AD 27 upon the arrival of Tishrei 1. That's New Year's Day in the fall-to-fall calendar. Given this method of counting, year 15 for Tiberius began on Tishrei 1, AD 27, and Jesus was baptized a few days afterwards. By the way, I will soon have a seminar posted on YouTube concerning the Jubilee calendar, and in that seminar, you will see that AD 27 and AD 30 are profoundly important when studying the 70 weeks of Daniel 9. We're going to discover in that seminar that the 70th week given in Daniel 9 began right on time in AD 27. And as predicted, Jesus was crucified in the middle of the 70th week. Take a look at this chart for just a moment. This is a piece of a much larger chart, but I've just zoomed in because I would like to show you how that the Sunday year of the 70th week aligned with AD 27. And because Wednesday is the middle year, the middle day of a week, the Wednesday year aligns with AD 30. So Jesus dies in AD 30, and just as the prophecy predicts. And so we see Jesus on the cross in the Wednesday year. And you see the 70th week follows the 69th week, which follows the 68th week. But truth is proven true by the harmony that comes from the sum of its parts. Well, I just wanted you to see that Jesus died in the middle of the 70th week, which happens to be a Wednesday day, middle of the week, Wednesday, and it's also the middle of the 70th week, counting from 27 to 33. But we'll save that for the Jubilee calendar study and go over that later. Okay, we have examined 2 instances of inclusive counting. There are 18 prophetic time periods in the books of Daniel and Revelation, and 17 of them use inclusive counting. So this is not a strange or unusual method of counting in the Bible. Because fractions of time are not involved, inclusive counting reduces the chance for error. In closing, I'm going to quickly run through 17 points that we have studied. Please be prepared to pause this video if you want to look up the Bible text, because I'm going to go through this quite rapidly. Number 1, the Feast of Passover occurs during the first month of God's year, and we know that God's year is a spring-to-spring year. Passover is always celebrated in the spring. Number 2, Passover began on Nisan 14 during the last hour of daylight. At twilight, a year-old lamb or goat was slaughtered. Number 3, the carcass was then roasted, and the Passover meal, which consisted of roasted meat with bitter herbs and unleavened bread, was eaten on Nisan 15 at midnight. Jesus and his disciples ate Passover in an upper room on Thursday night before he was crucified on Friday. Upon leaving the upper room at daybreak, Jesus and his disciples spent all day Thursday light, on the Mount of Olives and closed their meeting with prayer. You can read this prayer in John 17. As Friday night began, Jesus and his disciples retired to the Garden of Gethsemane. He was arrested that night under the cover of darkness and taken to the high priest. On Friday morning, remember, night before light, Jesus is arrested on Friday night, and then on Friday morning, the preparation day before the Sabbath, the Jews took Jesus to Pilate to be condemned to death. But the Jews would not enter Pilate's palace because they wanted to remain ceremonially clean so that they could eat the upcoming Passover at midnight on Sabbath. Jesus was hung on the cross at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. He died at 3 p.m. because it was Friday afternoon and the seventh-day Sabbath, and the feast of Passover was about to begin. Jesus' body was hurriedly put in a tomb nearby. The nation of Israel observed Passover on Sabbath at midnight. This particular Sabbath was considered a special Sabbath because 2 Sabbaths occurred at the same time. On Sabbath morning, that is the day after Friday morning, while Jesus was in the tomb, the Jews went to Pilate and asked that he secure the tomb for fear Jesus' disciples would steal his body and tell everyone that he had been resurrected. Then, on Sunday morning, the day after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus, but he was risen. Before his death, Jesus said he would be resurrected on the third day. After his death, the disciples said he was resurrected on the third day. God declares in Numbers 9 that failure to observe Passover at the appointed time is a sin, and the sinner must bear the consequences of his sin. 1 John 3 and Hebrews 4 declare Jesus never sinned, so Jesus and his disciples observed Passover at the appointed time. Data from the U.S. Naval Observatory website tells us that a new moon conjunction took place on Thursday, March 22nd at 8 p.m. in Jerusalem. This date became New Year's Day, Nisan 1 for AD 30, and this forces Nisan 15, the date for eating the Passover meal, to fall on a Thursday. Moreover, sighting the first crescent of a new moon would occur 2 days later, on Sabbath, and 2 different methods for establishing Nisan 1 explains why 2 Passovers were observed during the week of Christ's death. In fact, Constantine used this conflict within Judaism to separate Easter observance from Passover. Inclusive counting is a method of counting that has no fractions. Any part of a unit of time is counted as a whole unit. Jesus was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights when using inclusive counting. And finally, even though New Year's Day in AD 27 fell on a Thursday, this year cannot be the year of Christ's death, because according to Luke, A, it is the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, B, it is the year during which Jesus is baptized, and C, the next Passover, AD 28, fell on a Tuesday. When we add up all that is said about the days of the week, the laws governing the observance of Passover, the positions of the sun and moon, the data taken from the U.S. Naval Observatory, when we look at the nature of inclusive counting and the testimony of Jesus and his disciples after his resurrection, there is no wiggle room left. Jesus died on Friday afternoon, Nisan 16, AD 30. This annual date in our Julian calendar is Friday, April 7, AD 30. Each year, I like to pause on this day to think about the greatest manifestation of love that has ever been shown. The Creator of the universe, Jesus Christ, came to earth to show us the love of God. He came to suffer for our sins and give us the eternal life that belonged to Him. How astonishing and overwhelming is this? Well, I'm way out of time. Please bookmark this video and share it with your friends, and please keep watching for my next seminar on the Jubilee calendar.